I'm with Michael Mistretta from Fellowship of Israel Related Ministries. Now, Michael, what is Fellowship of Israel Related Ministries?
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so we lead a ministry called FIRM, Fellowship of Israel Related Ministries. Basically, we serve a network of 72 different ministries and local congregations across the country of Israel. Everyone that focuses in a different area, whether it's working with Holocaust survivors or young adults or discipling lone soldiers or helping to feed people or help women off the street. But the thing that brings us together is that we all want to see a day where every person in Israel's transformed with the love of Jesus, with the love of Yeshua. And so while we're made up of Christians and Messianic Jews and Christian Arabs, we come together to say, how can we actually accelerate gospel ministry in the country?
Now, Israel is at war at the moment. What is FIRM doing to help that war effort?
Yeah, they say nothing really brings people together like a common enemy. And that's definitely the case we've experienced in Israel. We probably had the most divided year just as a nation over, internal debates over politics and Supreme Court reforms, et cetera, et cetera. But as soon as the October 7th attack really saw the nation come together, not even just the believers in the country, the whole nation really rallied together. And we slipped into gear as firm. We launched an emergency crisis relief fund. And again, our heart with FIRM is to help Christians get involved in Israel in a gospel centered way. And so we said, well, we want to respond to this. We want, as believers in the midst of a dark, hopeless situation, to be the light, to bring hope. And the way we want to do that is by showing the love of Jesus to everyone around, because there's a lot of hurting people. And so what can we do with all these ministries together in order to see that happen? So we launched this emergency crisis fund. We started looking in three main areas to help people in the immediate. So can we help evacuate and relocate families? And now that number has grown to a couple 100,000. I mean, some people say 200, some people say 300, some are saying 500,000. I don't think anyone knows the real number, but it's at least 200,000. I mean, the Ministry of Education told me yesterday 400,000. Significant portion of our population has now been displaced. These people, some of them have witnessed atrocities. Just caring for them, loving on them, helping with their kids has been the first area we focused in. The second area was really focusing on emergency food and water. And so we set up a base in the center of Israel with one of our local partners, the Baptist Village. And we got volunteers from all over the country to come. And now we're through a partnership with Mercy Chefs, an international aid organization. We're now producing over 2,000 hot restaurant quality meals a day. They're getting sent out all across the country through our local partners, really seeing the body work together. And now this week, we're doing 1,000 grocery boxes that will be distributed across the country. And we have a vision, if that continues to grow and scale, to be doing 3,000 grocery boxes that will feed an entire family for a week, distributed to people that are at home, women that are at home with their kids, and their husbands have been called up to the reserves, helping displaced families. So we really see the body working together. The last piece is really just providing valuable equipment and supplies to municipalities that need it, to other communities that are in need, generators, mattresses, battery packs, anything that's needed, and just really to be a light as the body.
Wow. So you sound very, very busy indeed. So are these people coming from the Gaza belt that have been evacuated, and people from the northern area close to the now
Yeah,
Lebanese
yeah.
border,
So
they've been evacuated?
we started with about a few hundred people from the Gaza border communities, and hearing their stories. I mean, so many of them traumatized and what they experienced: terrorists in the streets, seeing dead bodies, hearing machine guns, hearing terrorists yell "Allahu Akbar" on their streets, like very traumatic things. We started there, but now the real big wave of evacuees is coming from the north. So from those on the Lebanese border. Now the government is evacuating those within 2 kilometers of the border, but there's several communities that are 3, 4, 5 kilometers away, 2.5 kilometers away, that do not get evacuated. So we're helping to host them, provide them shelter, food, and activities for their kids. At this point, we're hosting about 800 people, and by the end of this week, we'll be hosting about 1,500 people that have evacuated.
Now, this terrorist attack was very, very brutal. So some of these people that have came from the Gaza belt area, they must have seen some very horrific things.
Absolutely. We've heard stories of little children that just witnessed dead bodies, and there's a lot of trauma. I was
Mm.
talking to one family from the Gaza belt, maybe they were 2 or 3 kilometers from Gaza, and she was just telling us about all the people she knew that were no longer alive. But then also her best friend, she's 18 years old, her best friend, her name is Mika, and she is currently being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, along with her entire family. So this is not like some far off thing for them. This is a reality they experience. Many of them don't know how they'll ever be able to return to their homes. So
Mm.
we're talking about a major crisis here. And even though a lot of the world's attention has shifted, it's still a major crisis for these families.
I imagine Israel will obviously get control of this whole situation. And then will people really want to move back to those communities near the Gaza border? Because it might happen
Israel.
again.
Yeah, Israelis are quite resilient. So I think some of it depends on what happens with the ground operation and if Hamas truly is removed. But
Mm.
some of these people, well, some of them say never again, and some of them say, no, we were born there. That's our home. That's our life. We're moving back. In fact, some refuse to evacuate. And so I've been amazed by the resilience of some of these Israelis that really want to stay, even in spite of what they experienced.
Mm. Now, you've recently produced a video. Tell us about that.
So we heard from so many people around the world, how can we be involved? How can we help? How can we pray? And we as we were praying about this, we felt like the Lord gave us the scripture Isaiah 49, where Zion says to the Lord, am I forsaken? Am I forgotten by God? And the Lord responds and says, can a nursing mother forget her child? Can she have not compassion on the son of her womb? He says, surely even she might forget, but I will not forget you. Behold, I've inscribed you on the palm of my hands. And so we're asking for people to remember these 200 plus, now 222 confirmed hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. They may be going through the darkest season of their lives, and to remember that they're not forgotten by God. He remembers their name, he knows their name, and he says he's written them on the palm of his hands. And so, as a symbolic gesture, we've challenged Christians around the world and the church around the world to write the name of a hostage on their hands every single day and to look at that name and remember to pray for them as a reminder symbolically that they're not forgotten by God. We've already seen tens of thousands of Christians join this prayer movement. Several are praying by name. And we were so encouraged last Friday night because so many people had prayed for these hostages, Judith and Natalie, by name. And then we saw the news that they were miraculously released. And so we're just believing that God will bring all the hostages home. And if anyone wants to know more about this prayer movement, you can find out more at prayforisraelbyname.com.
Who's been kidnapped? What sort of people have been taken?
Yeah, I mean, it is a large variety, but as we're praying for these names, I was praying the other day for Kfir, a 9-month-old child, or praying for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, praying for some, one of the young girls that's been kidnapped. She may not even know this, but her family has been slaughtered. She's an orphan currently in Gaza. That we were praying for another lady in her 80s that's being held in Gaza. Entire families that are being held. And so it really is grotesque, the civilians and the sheer number, now over 222 civilians that are being held by Hamas in Gaza.
So children have been kidnapped. This sounds very demonic. What's happened down in the south?
Yeah, it sounds demonic. And even as we've seen, the IDF intercepted a bunch of written communication in Arabic about their plans for these attacks. And this was not an accident. This was not rogue Hamas operatives that were cutting off people's heads or burning homes with families alive in them. No, this was part of their plan to decapitate people, to cut off their feet and cut off their heads, to take hostages. It was intentional. It was calculated. And that just shows the darkness and the evil that we're truly dealing with.
It must be very difficult for the families and friends of these people who've been kidnapped. Of course, we know Gilad Shalit was captured for 5 years, so they must be very,
Yes.
very worried at this time.
Yeah, I remember when on October 7th, when we heard that there might be hostages, and I just thought that must be impossible. There's no way, we can't let that happen because of Gilad Shalit and 1,000 Palestinian prisoners traded for one Israeli soldier. And then it was maybe 10, 20, 50, and we find out now over 200 hostages. I mean, it's really unthinkable. And the fact that we've already been through 2 weeks, I cannot imagine what the last 2 weeks have been like for those that are being held hostage.
Well, the news tonight was saying Hamas may release another 50 dual citizen hostages. So there could be some good news. 2 Americans have already been freed. Was that a real hopeful sign for the families?
I think some people took that very hopeful that they were releasing the dual citizen hostages. Some other people were quite angry because it's like, well, what, just because they only have an Israeli passport, then you're going to keep them and torture them. And so that's a huge challenge. So we'll see what happens. I feel like it'd be a good thing. As many hostages that get freed now, that's great, but it is quite controversial.
I imagine soldiers won't be released that easily.
No, soldiers, I'm sure, will be some of the last that would be released willingly. And even if they free the 50, we're still talking about 180 some odd people that will be held hostage in Gaza.
So we need to be praying specifically for soldiers as well, because I guess it's easy to let the foreign captives go, but it's going to be much harder to let the soldiers go. And we don't want to see thousands and thousands of Palestinian prisoners who possibly have blood on their hand being released just for Israel soldiers to come back to their families.
No, and I think the government of Israel is not willing to do that this time. They really crossed the line. They don't want another ceasefire. We've had 9 ceasefires with Hamas, and they violated every one of them. And so I think they're really wanting to go and not just have a band-aid solution, but actually deal with this at the root cause.
So if the Christian world want to see peace here in the Middle East, they need to be praying for these hostages, don't they?
Yes, we need to be praying for these hostages. We need to be praying for wisdom for our leaders. Really, what I say to everyone is, you don't have to be anti-Palestinian to love Israel. You don't have to be anti-Israel to love Palestinians. But if you really, truly love Israelis and Palestinians, then you have to hate or abhor Hamas and what they stand for. The Bible says, abhor what is evil. And so if we love life, we must stand against those who are the antithesis of life. And that's Hamas, both keeping the people of Gaza and the Palestinians in a cycle of poverty and despair and intentionally targeting their lives, and also the people of Israel, especially from these border communities that have just lived in terror these last 18 years, and now obviously climactically leading to October 7th, which is an outright massacre.
I imagine Israel's in a very difficult position at the moment. They're actually bombing targets in the Gaza Strip, but they don't know where their hostages are at as well, do they?
That's the challenge. I'm surprised that, Hamas tried to spread some word that some Israeli hostages were killed by Israeli airstrikes. That kind of seems to have not really gone anywhere. They have lied about that in the past as well. So we really don't know. Obviously, the IDF is carefully calculating where these hostages are, but the amount of work it is to identify them is so difficult, especially since so much of Hamas's terror network and infrastructure is underground.
What is your prayer for this whole situation?
My prayer would be not for a bandage solution. So I think this is such a tragic thing that happened. The worst thing would be if we went back to what we had before. If we went back to this cold, I don't know if you call it really even peace, but just this stalemate, each side waiting for the other side to escalate it. I think we need to see some long-term solutions. I'd like to see long-term solutions for the Palestinian people in Gaza. I'd like to see long-term justice be done for the Israelis, 1,400 Israelis who've lost loved ones. And I'd like to see Hamas not just wounded in a way that they can rebuild over the next several years to all of a sudden retaliate and do it again. I'd like to see Hamas, their entire infrastructure, really dismantled to preserve more lives in the long run.
And what's your website for people who'd like to know more about praying for these hostages?
Yeah, so we have prayforisraelbyname.com. We're praying for the names of these hostages. And then you can also find out more about us at firm, F-I-R-M, Israel.org.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Paul.